Welcome to the Shared Practices podcast, our segment of Coach's Corner with my favorite co-host, Caitlin. Caitlin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. How are you? It's good to be here.
Doing so good. I'm excited because your internet is like rock solid. And when we were doing stuff before, we had to like shut your camera off and all of that. And now we're on video and you're here. You're with us.
My next step is creating a podcast studio just like yours, but I feel like Coach's Corner would need to come out a little bit more frequently for me to be able to justify that setup, you know?
This only took me 8 years to build a podcast studio like this with actual wall art and all of that. So, no pressure.
Right.
I'm really excited for the topic today because one of the hardest things as a practice owner is to create a sense that everyone knows their job, knows how to manage themselves, and is actually getting it done. That is like one of the secrets of practice ownership, that it's like, okay, if I could just get everyone to do their freaking job, life would be so much better. And the answer to that is often not what people think. Like the default is micromanage. Just get in there, put your thumb on everyone, keep them accountable in a aggressive micromanagey kind of way. And if you do that, like it might work, but it might burn people out. But today we're going to talk about a theme that we've already been talking about here on the podcast recently, which is checklists, which are essential to helping everyone feel comfortable with their job, staying on task, using their time wisely, getting in and out of the office. And tell me, why do people not like checklists? Like, why is this a problem for people?
Well, you just touched on it, I think, which is, I think it's associated sometimes with micromanagement. If I give my team such a granular checklist, I'm micromanaging them. And where I push back on that is actually, if you eliminate the noise and you are just really clear with expectations for their individual role, they have one thing to look at every single day. They know what's expected. And then once they get through those, it actually allows them to have so much more creative thinking space and time to kind of think about bigger projects. It eliminates a lot of the like, am I doing everything I should be doing? Because that's clear cut. And so I actually think it's the best tool to avoid micromanagement if you can get into the right swing of things.
Well, and that's why after Scott and I talked about how to become a dental CEO for 5 episodes, I pushed on him and I was like, please, please, please give me the CEO checklist. Like, what does this look like daily, weekly, monthly? Because for me personally, that's kind of one of the only ways to stay on task. Like you have to give me an easy blueprint to follow. Otherwise, I get overwhelmed. There's just so much pulling at your attention. You feel like you should be connecting with the team or walking around and checking on patients. You should be looking at different things. It's easy to get lost in the fires, in the problems. And so I naturally gravitate to wanting to have a checklist. And I think if people can flip the script in their mind of this is micromanaging to actually, no, your employees want to win. And it's fun to get these little micro wins all throughout the day and look back and say, I didn't forget anything. I did my job. I did it well. I did it on time. Or, oh, here's this one thing I forgot. I'm so glad I had this checklist so that I don't get home and it's like you've left the oven on. Like you feel like, oh crap, I forgot to do this before I left the office.
Well, and we're talking about creating self-managed teams. As the CEO, you want to know that your office manager or whoever is overseeing operations underneath you or alongside of you is holding everybody else accountable, that you're not worrying about that, right? And so for that person, they're one person. And so they can't walk in every single morning and give everybody instructions of, did you do this? Did you do that? They're never going to get anything done either. And so for them to give a structured list, whether it's by department or by position, we'll get into that, is so crucial because they need free space in their mind to check in and listen to exams and how patients are doing and say hello to patients and connect with their team members and measure success. They can't just be micromanaging all day. And so this is a way out of that, where checklists get turned into them at a certain point. They can always access those checklists to make sure stuff's getting done. But this is that secret key, I think, to the self-managed team.
100%. And, when Scott and I were talking about this, I asked him is checking the other checklists, one of the CEO's checklist items. And his point was, well, anyone can check the box. Like looking at the checklist isn't always the most helpful for you as the leader. You're going to go look and check that the work was done. And then if it wasn't, you're going to come back and look who initialed that it was
That's
done.
right. That's right.
And so, this doesn't have to be that like everyone lines up at the end of the day with their checklist nervous and they have to turn it in to be able to go home. It's not like that. You are still expecting them to manage themselves, but this is the tool that allows your team to manage themselves. So I'm excited to get into this today around, like realistically, you're coming from an office, which we encounter this all the time with our clients. Like we walk into an office that has 0 checklists, and we're starting from square one. Where to focus? It can feel overwhelming to feel like, oh crap, we got to create all of this stuff. So before we start that conversation, is there any other like pre-thoughts that you had to lead us into this, or are we ready to jump in?
Oh, let's jump in. Let's talk about the how here.
You have a doctor and a team come to you and they're like, Caitlin, we're scaling, we're adding more team members. And we feel like before, when it was just one person at the front desk, one assistant, one hygienist, everyone just kind of knew their jobs and did them. But now that we're going to that productive solo, we're splitting roles up. We're thinking about it. Where does someone start? Where do they create this system of checklists in their office?
So let's break it up by department. Let's talk about front office first. The first place to always start is clearly defining roles and responsibilities. That has to be step one. So before we talk about how we're going to make sure everything's getting done, I need to know who is responsible for getting what done. And so as that practice is scaling, those roles at the front office are getting more and more specialized. You and I have done episodes on that. And so first, getting really clear on who owns what process up front, having those lists as just a general, these are our clear outline duties and how we all come together to be a bigger piece of the puzzle. Then you can easily morph those into daily, weekly, monthly checklists for those individual positions. This is the one area of the practice where everybody up there is doing something niche and totally different from the next person, when they're not patient facing. So what I'll typically do is I'll start with the roles and responsibilities spreadsheet and we'll edit that together to make it, we have our base template and it needs to be customized for the practice. And so I'll get together with that front office team or that manager and we'll cut and paste and move things around and rename things and make it make sense for them. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes to keep it super simple, I'll just create 3 more tabs. Let's say we have a patient care coordinator who's owning check-in, first voice on the phone, hygiene. And then let's say we have a treatment coordinator who's owning checkout, financial arrangements, doctor schedule, making sure that's nice and full. And then we have a financial coordinator who's a little bit more behind the scenes, handling insurance payments, claim follow-up, patient AR, things like that. I'll make 3 separate tabs, and then we'll go in and we'll do a daily checklist, and sometimes we'll go so niche as morning and afternoon. Because there are certain tasks that are, I think, a little bit more time sensitive that need to get done first in the morning.
So I love the clarity here because like dental assistants, once you get in the routine, like you kind of know I got to set up the operatory. And there's almost like natural consequences of if you don't do this, then this happens and you're being audited right away.
Instant. Yeah.
Yeah. Like everyone knows.
Everything's running late and
yeah. Like we miss stuff. And at the beginning of the day, end of the day, if you don't break down stuff at the end of the day and clean it up, then the next day you've got a mess to deal with. And once again, you kind of know. So the front is murkier, in my opinion, than the back. And it's because there really are 4 roles. And I think this is foundational. We covered this in a previous episode, but I think it's worth revisiting because number one, it's in the archives and people may or not have listened to it. But this idea, because a lot of times you don't have 4 people at the front desk. Maybe you've got 1. Maybe it's the dentist is fulfilling the office manager role, which is one of the 4. And then that other person at the front is, and I got to pull it up here, is the patient care coordinator and the treatment coordinator and the financial coordinator, all rolled into one. So you've split the 4 into 3 in one person and 1 as the dentist on top of everything else. And as soon as you start adding team members, that second front desk team member, that third front desk team member, that office manager, now all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, we gotta get organized. We gotta split this up. And so being clear, and even I love your process of even if one person is doing 2 jobs, you still want to be clear on the 2 different roles, but we're just saying like you're doing both of these because we're a smaller practice. And so then when you do hire that next person, it is so much easier to break that off because you've done the roles and responsibilities up front and you've probably done the checklists for them up front. And then you can split that out. So I just want to remind our listeners of the fact that there are 4 roles. And I'm going to say them again because if it's a podcast, people are going to be like, crap, what was that? They were washing the dishes. Patient care coordinator, treatment coordinator, financial coordinator, and office manager are the 4 roles of the front office.
And of course, those could be scheduling coordinator,
Sure.
in your office, or practice administrator or insurance coordinator. So I don't like to get too worried necessarily about the titles. So if you're listening to this, I think the important piece is making it work for your practice, being really clear on each role. If you want to rename it something else, that's fine, but be clear on that.
Yeah. And so this roles and responsibilities is the starting point. And then we turn it into a checklist. And when we're turning this into checklists, talk to us about the different types of checklists. There's kind of like morning, end of day, something in the middle, weekly, monthly, like what are the big picture types of checklists?
Yeah, so I think for both front office and assisting departments, you can have the daily, stuff that needs to get done every single day, and you can break that down. And then you can have an opening checklist and a closing checklist. And so I have samples of that, particularly for the assisting team, of just how to open up that office every morning and how to close it. You could do the same thing for the front, just kind of depends on how your team is structured with in time and everything. Right. Those are the more just like day-to-day operational tasks. And then you've got more of the patient-facing tasks. When it comes to the front office, one example of a time sensitive for me is for a patient care coordinator who I am expecting to make that hygiene schedule their baby. When I'm training them, I will say, you're looking at today's schedule and the next 2 business days. And if that is not either jam-packed full or just open enough to how we like it for new patients or whatever, you immediately, that first thing in the morning, you're making your confirmation calls for those unconfirmed patients within the next 2 business days, because that's then giving them all day to call you back. If you've got unconfirmed people for tomorrow on top of holes already, and you wait until 2 p.m. to start calling those folks, what do you think is going to happen in terms of by the time they get back to you, it's too late to fill that? Yeah. So that's an example of, morning versus afternoon for more of those very niche roles.
Okay, so each role is going to have a different weight of, is this an opening thing? Is this a morning thing? Is this an afternoon thing? Is this an end of the day thing? And as well as a downtime checklist. So talk to us about that of, who is everyone getting a downtime checklist? Because there often is downtime no matter the role. What do you think about which roles really need that downtime checklist?
So through my years of coaching, I think it's been very rare that a client hasn't at some point asked me, what is everyone doing for downtime? Like, what are hygienists supposed to do for downtime? Do you have any ideas for me? And so I went ahead and created a downtime protocol for each department document. And so I have it broken down by department. And you look at mine and you then morph it into what makes sense for you. Everything I send my clients is to be customized, right? But it's kind of, in my opinion, if I were running your practice, where I would want your team to go first. Because the last thing you want as a manager or a CEO is, okay, the schedule fell apart, and then people go to you, what do you want me to do right now? That's taking up so much mental space for you and for them that by the time we figure out what to do, it's already time to see the next patient. And so this is another example of something that you just want already thought out. So if someone comes to you, hey, I have an hour, this person didn't show up, what can I do? You can say, did you check the downtime protocol? Like, go back to that. And then if you get in the habit of that, they just know to just go directly to that. And so I have it broken up by department because I think each team member brings something so valuable. And so I have my preferences on if a hygienist has an hour, I would really love for them to use whatever software the practice is using and maybe make some phone calls directly to patients that they know who are unscheduled. So I think they can just be so impactful on retaining and reactivating their patients. I also really like them calling new patients coming up on their schedule or
Oh, cool.
SRP patients coming up on their schedule, just to that helps build value for it and make sure that patient's going to come a little bit more.
Yeah, well, and I think you were talking before the call of hygienists oftentimes don't need some extensive beginning of the day, morning, afternoon, end of the day checklist because I mean they're just seeing patients all day long. They tend to know what they need to do when they first come in, and then they're straight into the first patient, and then they're working up till the end, and then they're out the door. And so that downtime checklist really is the key checklist to getting the most out of your hygienist. Whereas other team members who have more roles and aren't directly clinical every minute of the day are going to have these other checklists. So I love, the thought occurred to me, you shouldn't be allowed to get mad at your team members for looking at their phones, being on social media during downtime if you don't have a downtime checklist. So it's as a practice owner, you're not allowed to get upset if you've not given them a downtime checklist. You can't freak out on them for not using that time effectively. Is that fair to say?
That can be applied to so many different things that you may be freaking out on your team about, right? Like
Yeah.
if something goes wrong, it's like, well, what's your policy for that? Oh, I don't have one. So I think practice ownership over time is just constantly creating more standard operating procedures, more policies around how you want certain things handled. And then over time, if you're really doing your part to build these and document these and teach them to your team, make them a part of your handbook, a part of your onboarding, then you can expect people to reference those and know what to do. But it's a slow build and it doesn't happen overnight. So yeah, I think the default, because if the team doesn't know what to do, they'll just fill in the blank. They want to look busy. And so that's where you're going to get stuffing the goodie bags and sharpening the instruments and these things that are helpful and better than scrolling on your phone. But I really like to say, okay, we don't have a patient. We want our team to have the opportunity to stay clocked in. Let's guide them to what are those like schedule building, value building tasks that are going to move the needle forward and not just kind of like, okay, this is better than nothing.
I think that's fantastic. And now I'm thinking about if someone wanted to implement this into their practice, I'm thinking about what does the implementation look like over a month or two. And I would love, this is just me making stuff up. So you're the one who actually does this. You're the one who implements this. But I would love it if if the doctor sat down and was like, okay, I don't even know where to start. Starting with the roles and responsibilities, if you don't have that, your first downtime checklist for everyone in the office. You could sit everyone down, have a meeting, say, we're going to work on these things in order. First, we're going to work on roles and responsibilities. So the alien abduction model of if you were abducted by an alien, what would all the steps be to do your job, all your roles and responsibilities, and then bring those back to the team. So it's like your downtime checklist right now is one item, roles and responsibilities. And next week we're going to meet and we're going to go over those together as a team. And we're going to add and edit and make sure we're not forgetting anything. Now, your new downtime checklist is to build a downtime checklist. So every time you've got downtime this next week, start thinking about what are the things that, okay, I need to remember to do these. And your next team meeting, you go over that downtime checklist for each role and responsibility. And then you could say, now for everyone but the hygienist, you're going to come up with your morning checklist, your end of day checklist, or morning and afternoon. and do that. And then the next team meeting is weekly, and then the next team meeting is monthly. That's just like the stupid version that I'm like thinking of to roll this out over time if someone just feels overwhelmed, because that's where I would be. I would feel overwhelmed at where to even start in this process.
Yeah. And I think it's good you're speaking to that angle, because starting somewhere like that is better than nothing. And so if you are like a solo owner,
Yeah.
you're the only leader in the practice, you're not in coaching, you don't have an office manager, you don't have a team lead, and you are doing this by yourself, I think what you just described is better than nothing. Like, start there.
Yeah.
What I would caution is have an outline in your head that you convey to them of where you want this going. Because if you just ask your team to just write down a list of everything that they do and then write a list of everything they think they should do during downtime, well, if you're not happy with the way that's going right now 100%, the document they submit to you is going to be a direct reflection of that. And so at least that puts you into editor mode. But I would just caution, and of course, my preference is have you work with a coach with this.
Yes.
Hopefully you're at a place where you have someone supporting you from a leadership aspect, whether that's a front office lead or someone just your go-to or whatever. Start working on that together of, well, this is what we want downtime to look like.
Yep.
This is how we want the roles split up. And I would much prefer that the leadership team, whether that's one person or 4 people, can present that to the team and give them that guidance, as opposed to like, it's a free-for-all, you guys tell me.
They're like, well, we better check the social media page.
You're right. It's gotta stuff those goodie bags.
Right.
It's not going to be what you want it to be unless you give that guidance.
Well, and that's where the DIY, like you said, is better than nothing. But if you've got a framework to work off of, you're working with a coach, you're working with an office manager, we're coming with our own checklist in our head. And maybe we're getting input of like, hey, is there anything we're missing or anything you want to make sure that is on there? So they feel heard, they feel like they've been part of building this, rather than like, here are the roles and responsibilities from on high and the checklist. Which, I mean, if you kind of know and you know, fine, you can do that.
If you're going to DIY it, let's at least like join some Facebook groups. There's like office manager Facebook groups. People will share resources with you of like, hey, here's my checklist for my front office team.
Yep.
Let's reach out to our network. Let's chat GPT it. Let's do something other than just like, here's a pen and paper. Team, tell me what you guys do all day long. Like it kind of seems like you don't know it all, and it may not go the way you want it to.
Well, I love it. This is once again, Richard is unafraid to make himself look like an idiot on air, because that might be what someone thinks to do. Of like, let's just work on this together. So obviously, working with a coach who has this is the key. Not only have you helped people do this, you know where the practice is going. So if they're saying we are going to scale, then you're building those checklists for that future growth in mind. And maybe there's some things right now that you don't have to manage that you will when you're at a larger team, when there's more team members in this, and knowing how to split this up and hold multiple people accountable in the same department, that all of a sudden complicates all of this and makes it more important to do this thoughtfully and with someone who's done this over and over and over. A question I have is, we talked about the resistance to checklists at the beginning of this. Do you have examples of an office who's been through this process, the things they say after they've implemented checklists?
I'm going to be really transparent. I think even getting the implementation there, even with the best of intentions, that tends to be a long journey for me as the coach.
Yeah.
So implementing them and then sticking to them and not kind of letting them fall by the wayside after a few weeks, it's a challenge. And so you really have to know your why behind doing this, and you have to be committed, because if you roll this out and then you as the leader let it fall by the wayside, it's sending the message of, it's not that important. Like, this is just something they heard on a podcast. Like, he'll forget about it next month,
Yeah.
And the office manager, or the team, the front office lead or the assisting lead, whoever, we need to appoint somebody who is going to be accountable to creating these or fostering the creation with the team. And then You mentioned earlier, like, this doesn't have to be something where we line up at the end of the day and turn it in. No, but at the same time, there has to be an easy way for the accountability champion to view this checklist and see that it's getting done. And so I agree. I don't want people handing OM papers every day. I don't want her email flooded with, here's my checklist for the day. I
But
prefer like a Google Drive or something like that, where it's just auto updated, where if she looks at it at any given point, they know she could look at it at any given point. So
yes.
they're filling it out, but it's not just like this constant oversight. But if you don't have a way of sticking to it, it's not going to get implemented. It's going to be rolled out and tested. It's going to be in the beta test and forgotten about. So doctor and their leadership team has to be really committed of, we believe in checklists. We're going to be a practice that uses checklists. And if somebody doesn't use the checklist, we're going to take that seriously.
So I think there needs to be, and I'm glad you're bringing this up. This is not sunshine and roses on the other side of this at first. So you want to plan on this, maybe taking a quarter to build, and then another quarter to really ingrain, and you're holding people accountable. And maybe you even set at the beginning of the next quarter, you say, you know what, we're going to check in on this every month of like, okay, how are we doing? Have we lost sight? Or, obviously you want to be checking on the checklist the day and the week, that's part of what you're now doing. But also overall, have we slipped somewhere? Have we lost track of this? Where did it go wrong? Where did we forget? Where is it not visible enough or not easy enough to access? Or what is not working? So a whole quarter of building and a whole quarter of like making sure this is truly embedded into our DNA. Is that a fair expectation?
I think that's a good place to start, and understand you will have to keep beating this drum.
Yeah.
Especially if you have turnover, like, you'll have to reinstill this into the next person too. Let me ask you this. You're managing and owning your own practice, and you've rolled out these checklists. Let's just give front office as an example. You've got a patient care coordinator and a treatment coordinator, and you listened to this episode and you did the work and you rolled this out to them. And you told yourself, okay, Fridays are my CEO day. I'm going to check the Google Drive to see if the week's worth of checklists was filled out. I'm going to check that like every other Friday, and then if it's not done, I'll follow up. You get in there, you see like Monday and Tuesday were filled out, and then like the rest are just kind of like forgotten about, not filled out. That person was there working. There were no fires throughout the day. And you go to them and you say, hey, I noticed that this checklist wasn't filled out. And they say to you, well, I did all those things. I didn't have time to fill out the checklist.
I would say, as far as I know, maybe someone else did it. Maybe it got done. Maybe it didn't get done. If it's not on paper, I have to assume we're missing things. And I don't know what we're missing. That's why it's hard. And so I'm going to have to follow up with you more frequently. If I'm only checking, once a week, if all these are done, and multiple days are really spotty or haphazard or not done at all, now we're going to have to go back to like daily. This is part of the daily process until I trust you that you are going through this every day.
Exactly. Like, you have to convey the why to them. I didn't give you this checklist to add busy work to your day. I hope you know that about me as a leader. The last thing I want is like just give you more stuff to fill out. But I can't be everywhere all at once. And so if I'm not visually seeing what we agreed upon as how you're going to communicate to me that the job got done, it's impossible for me to hold you accountable, and I'm going to be forced to ask you and micromanage you. And that's not something I'm going to do here. This is on you to complete the job all the way through. So making your confirmation calls, filling the hygiene schedule from the ASAP list, and checking the bathroom before lunch is your job. I'm empowering you to do it. And if I don't see that getting done and you're not communicating it to me, I'm going to assume it's not getting done.
And that's that crucial conversation that these are the make or break moments of, is this implemented into your practice in a sticky way that's happening? It's like you can almost guarantee that this will happen. It's not like
you can.
It's not an if, it's a when. You'll have to have this conversation, and it's not even a when, it's how many times. And that's just the reality of it.
So know your why.
Yeah.
Know why in your practice you are going to be a team that uses checklists. Here's why they matter. And if we have a team member who is continuously resistant after coaching and sit downs and conversations about it, that's a bigger conversation. It sounds like no big deal. It's just a checklist. Chill out.
Yeah.
But this is the fabric of our team, you know?
I feel like there's a book called The Checklist Manifesto. If you're having a hard time articulating the why or buying in on this personally, that might be a good resource to go read so that you can articulate this. And then don't assume that the first or the fifth or the 10th time that you've explained the why that it's going to sink in. And sometimes it takes an aha moment after doing this for a week or a month, and it becomes more and more routine for them to really buy in. Or it takes them training someone else all of a sudden, and now they're like, oh, okay, this is nice. Like I can trust that they're doing their part and I'm doing my part, and this is now part of who we are. I think a whole nother episode that we're not going to have time to talk about today. I made the mistake before the call of saying, I was like, yeah, and the onboarding checklist, for training people. And you're like, well, no, onboarding and training are two different things. We've been over this, Dr. Lowe. We've done a whole episode on this. But like having, onboarding is all the steps to get someone in the practice and an employee. Training is the actual training of them on their role and responsibility and getting them up to speed to what they need to do on the daily. If you have roles and responsibilities and checklists, all of a sudden that training has a lot more teeth and focus to it. And I think a lot of ease. I think this is the moment that you said that turnover is where you have to kind of re-emphasize this and redo this. But I also think that having done this creates less stress around turnover and training. Is that fair to say?
Well, it does, and it really fosters the situation of everybody knows what their team members are doing too. Like, oh, you have a checklist as well. I recognize that you have things you need to get done throughout the day, and you fit into this puzzle in a different way than I do. And so that's where breaking down the roles and breaking down who's owning what, both on a list and then also on a checklist, really cultivates that of like, we're working together and I know what I have to worry about. And then I also know what I don't have to worry about. That's on your checklist.
Oh, actually, one of my buddies was just talking about this the other day, that in his office right now, there's this like score that everyone's keeping of like, how many patients did this person see? Did they do this job? Did they do the job? There's this human element of fairness that is so deeply ingrained in us of like, well, I'm doing more, I'm doing less. And so much bickering and finger pointing and cultural friction can occur when it's not clear. And it's just like, well, I did this yesterday. It's their turn to do it today. Versus if it's clearly defined, it is fair for you to do your job and get paid. It is fair for them to do their job and get paid. And these are the jobs.
Yeah, so that's what I mean about like eliminate the noise, eliminate the chaos, get very clear. And then once we're through all that, then we've got time to take a break. We've got time to chit chat with a patient we love or whatever, the whole point is so that we're not having to be this rigid, everything's on fire, so we never have time for fun. If you follow these, the whole point is that you actually do have time to breathe and check social media for the company and do all the fun stuff.
Yeah. Well, and with that too, in our course, and I don't know the current state of the course as we've rebranded the courses and all that. I forget what like they're all called now. But we have a course that we've taught to office managers that includes these checklists in depth. And I remember going to this course with my office manager, even though I've done this podcast, like I still am not great at conveying all of this information. And all of a sudden we sat there and we're like, okay, here's what we need to do. Here's how we can implement this. And getting their buy-in on the power of this. I think your office manager, if you're a large enough office to have an office manager, there is an incredible relief and power in your ability to do your job at managing everyone when they have the skill set to self-manage and you have the skill set to audit them and encourage them and hold them accountable on these checklists. It just shifts what you can do and what you're having to put out fires versus this is how we operate like a well-oiled machine.
Well, yeah. So what I would say to that is, so you're referring to analytics-based office management, and I know we're going to have a team-focused course next year that's in the works. And to your point, it may be renamed, but there'll definitely be an opportunity to bring the team out probably middle of next year to absorb a lot of this. But I also know we're working on a course for January, right? And coaches will be there at that course. And so if you bring team or you want to talk directly to coaches there about this topic, there's going to be support as early as January.
I've never seen a dentist bring a team member to one of our courses, whether they're an office manager or just at the front desk, or they're a hygienist and they need to understand our growth model and they're part of all of this. You will never regret having given them the vision and the tools to understand what you see. That's the problem with podcasts. As much as I love podcasts, the listener of the podcast, the dentist, is the bottleneck of this information. And even if you've listened to 200 hours of this, you can't convey it to your whole team. And you almost need to get out of the way and just let them drink from the fire hose. And now they're going to hold you accountable. They're like, I want this thing that we talked about in the course, and this is what's going to make the difference for us. Why haven't we done this yet? And you're like, you're right. Let's go do it.
Yes. And how many times, doctors, do you come back from a course that you got all excited about and you go and you tell your team everything and they're like, I didn't hear the same things you heard, and I don't know if this is legit or you're going to forget about this in a month. And so having a team member there with you who's just as excited coming back is actually going to make it sticky for you. And I can also say, if you've listened at all and been enticed by coaching, and maybe one of your holdups is how would my team respond to a coach? I've actually started a lot of coaching relationships from the team member coming and hearing directly from us, talking to us during lunch and the break. And they go, oh, I really like this person. I want to hear more from them. I need their help. And then you've got the team member asking you for coaching and you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Well, and that there's this like defensive-ness of like, there's this person outside of our practice who's coming and telling us what to do. And if I resist enough and throw a fit, maybe they'll like stop doing coaching. Whereas when they've met you and they've been like, they've seen you.
Oh, it's not so scary.
Yeah. They're just like, no, I want that. Like, why aren't we working with her or him or, with them? And so that's the other advantage. So I love that you brought that up. And I'm excited for teams and doctors to get organized. It's worth the input up front to do this, and it's worth the holding people accountable and using these in your day-to-day operations, because you can't scale. I mean, if you think you can run an office with a small team without checklists, like, sure, you're going to be more unorganized. You're going to deal with more fires. There's going to be less, but you try and scale to 3 hygienists, 4 hygienists, 2 doctors, 3 doctors, and you don't have checklists, everything will break. Like you just cannot scale without this. So this is essential.
Yeah, and it's a good thing to work on if you're like in the waiting period before your next big growth moment. Sometimes we're waiting on construction or the patient base to get to a certain point to when we can keep growing. Sometimes we're kind of just in that transitional hurry up and wait.
Yep.
This will keep an entrepreneur busy and focused. Is like, do these little things that are going to make it so that when you are scaled, you're ready for it.
I love it. Well, Caitlin, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I know we've touched on this in the past, but bringing this back to the forefront of people's minds of how do I get my team to manage themselves and get them to actually do the job that I'm paying them to do every day. And they want it. They want to be clear. They want to feel confident. They want the momentum. Even if at first it's kicking and screaming, in the end, everyone sees it and they're on board. This is how you have to operate as a business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always like to say, if you have follow-up questions from this episode, please reach out. I'm Caitlin at sharedpractices.com. That's CAITLIN. Always happy to hear from listeners, answer questions. So yeah, thanks for having me back on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll talk to you next time on the Shared Practices podcast.